Welcome back to another episode of The Adversity Advantage. I'm your host, Doug Bopst, and today's guest is Colin O Brady. Colin is a 10-time world record-breaking explorer. He's a speaker, entrepreneur, and expert on mindset. His feats include the world's first solo, unsupported, and fully human-powered crossing of Antarctica, speed records for the Explorers Grand Slams and the Seven Summits, and the first human-powered ocean row across Drake Passage. Colin's highly publicized expeditions have been followed by millions, and his work has been featured by the Joe Rogan Experience, The Tonight Show, The Today Show, and the New York Times. He is the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Impossible First, and now the 12-Hour Walk, Invest One Day, Conquer Your Mind, and Unlock Your Best Life. So let's get this conversation going, and welcome Colin O Brady to the Adversity Advantage podcast. Colin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I'm super excited to chat with you, man, because like your story and everything that you do is like the epitome of the adversity advantage. And before we get into like a little bit more of your backstory and your own journey of adversity, you climbed Mount Everest once, you crossed Antarctica, but that wasn't enough. You had to do it with your wife again and climb Everest for the second time. So like what goes through your mind like when you're thinking about doing something? Like I've often wondered, like people like yourself who go on these crazy feats, like when is enough enough?
No, it's a good question. I don't know if I have the perfect answer to when is enough, but the inspiration, it's interesting. I mean, I love what your show is about. I love, we'll get deep into it, the turning adversity. I've had plenty of that in my life into an advantage. But really, for me, at its core, you could point to the external accolades, 10 world records, dumb things that people have never done in history, etc. But at its core for me, that's not the driving factor. For me, at its core is an exploration of the human experience, of the human potential. How far can we push ourselves to the edges and still thrive and still come out the other end stronger? And so really all the things you mentioned, all the other things I've done, I think filter in some way, both consciously and subconsciously through that lens. You did mention having climbed Mount Everest twice. I write a chapter about my second Mount Everest climb, which happened last year with my wife. That wasn't a world record project of any sort, which is different for me in some contexts. But I'll tell you what, the experience, the journey of sharing that with the person I love more than anyone in the world, perhaps was even more profound than some of these other kind of, feats of higher accolades, so to speak. So it's all a journey that we're all on in this life that we're living. And for me, I like to really push the edges and feel the full tapestry of life's full experience.
That's amazing, man. That's incredible. And I know Jenna was like a big inspiration for you, not only in writing the book, but in a lot of the physical achievements that you've had. I know she encouraged you when you were crossing Antarctica. I know she's encouraged you in so many aspects of your life. Like, what was it about this? Like, what made her like want to take a climb with you up Mount Everest when she knew how scary it was, how dangerous it was? Was it because she saw how much this has had an impact on you and seen how much it's changed you, or was she just looking to challenge herself?
It's a funnier story than that. I'll try to not go on too long, but there's some funny twists and turns in that story, which is Jenna is not someone who self-identifies as an athlete. She's not someone who that's a core part of her identity. Now, that said, she's not just my wife. I'd be remiss to say that. We have all the expeditions I've done, all the businesses that we've created, the success that we've had. She is, a 50-50 counterpart. It's half me, it's half her. And, co-dreamer, co-conspirator, obviously life partner, romantically, professionally. I mean, our lives are deeply intertwined, and it's been an incredible journey. We've been together for 15 years. We met in our early 20s. And just like any relationship, sure, we've had our ups and downs, but really it has been incredible experience to walk beside her in this life. But she has been my number one support system. Like I said, not just emotionally, but through all the details. I mean, spreadsheets on how many grams of food I can bring in my sled across Antarctica to weigh this much and how much I can eat and not eat. And, I'm in the weeds with all the little details, the permitting to row a boat across Drake Passage. She's working with like the Chilean government to get, passage into the waterways of the Chilean military and the Antarctic. I mean, she's deep in the nuances of it. So after all this, at one point she said to me, and I think it was in 2019, she says, maybe this sounds ridiculous. We're in our house in Jackson Hole looking up at the mountain. She goes, maybe I can climb Everest one day. And I was like, she's like, what do you think? She just asked me, what do you think? And I was like, heck yeah, you could. Now, we'd have to train you up. You know, she's climbed some mountains before, but like we got to train the technical mountaineering, you know, get your fitness up, get your strength up, get your confidence up in the mountains. But if you commit to this goal, you can do it. And she committed to the goal, trained super hard for a year. You can only climb Everest really in the spring. So Everest is typically climbed in May, but the expeditions usually start in April. It's like an 8-week expedition typically. And we're getting ready to fly we're actually going to climb Everest from the Chinese side. There's a Nepalese side and a Chinese side. Of course, the summit's the same, but you can approach it from either side, either country. We have flights to China on April 4th of 2020. As anyone who lived through the spring of 2020 can know that we sure didn't get on that flight. There were no flights. They were all canceled due to COVID. And she knows this. I read about this in the book, my new book, The 12-Hour Walk. She quit. She quit after that. You know, COVID was a hard time. I mean, for everyone, I think it affected everyone, affected me. I found myself in some deep anxieties, deep, dark places in my own mind, kind of sitting adrift, purposeless, things that we had on the calendar, business opportunities, just gone, right? Everything. And look, my problems are far less than the larger global problems of, you know, millions of people dying and getting sick and whatever. But like, you know, you're holed up in a house in your own mind, can't do any things you want to do. And in that same kind of moment, Jenna quit on this goal of climbing Everest. So a year later, in 2021, we had already deposited some money down for the first climb that got canceled that they were going to recredit to us. We had enough left for one climber. And I was like, do you want to go? And she was like, no, I didn't train. She stopped training for a whole year. And I decided to go, and I'm going to attempt a world record of something called climbing Everest and Lhotse. So Lhotse is the 4th tallest mountain in the world, sits adjacent to Everest. And we going to attempt that climb. I'm going to attempt that climb. But she's like, I'll trek to base camp with you. I'll come to base camp with you. Like, great, you know, amazing experience. The trek in itself is, you know, once in a lifetime experience. For those listening, it's not super expensive, you know, but it's such a beautiful, beautiful, untouched, pristine part of the world. And there's no roads, you know, people are walking through footpaths to get through these little villages. And you finally reach Everest Base Camp at 17,000 feet. Again, I could go long in the story. I want you to buy the book. This is one of the chapters of the book. This isn't the totality of the book, but there's one chapter on this. The long story short is Jenna did not plan to climb Everest there. She didn't even bring her down suit for climbing Everest. She didn't have a permit. She didn't have all these things. And slowly over my climb, she's like, well, I do have a permit to come up to Camp 1, maybe Camp 2, so I'm excited to climb with her. And then slowly but surely, she like sees the summit and goes, well, maybe I could climb Everest one day. We'll have to come back one day. Long story short, I finally said to her, well, what if one day was today? And, you know, a whole rigmarole of permits and money and logistics and all the stuff had to ensue to make this possible. It's not like we just went rogue and she climbed the mountain. But the long story short is Jenna went over, having given up on herself a year before, and still managed to get to the summit of Everest. And we did that together. And like I said, standing on that summit together and all the trials and tribulations, I mean, crazy stuff happened. We got hit by an avalanche at Camp 2. Not people we knew directly, but people did die over the course of that Everest season, as they do every single year. There was all sorts of adversity that we faced along that time. But it was an incredible experience together. Now, this book that I wrote, it's called The 12-Hour Walk, and we'll get into what that means. But at its core, it's a book about mindset. It's a book about how all of us, myself included, we have these limiting beliefs. We have these thoughts that go through our head. I'm not strong enough. I'm not fit enough. I don't like to be. I like to be uncomfortable. What if I fail? I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. We know as humans this sort of negative thought pattern that can loop in our brains. And of course, just like anyone else, I'm guilty of all this. And this book, at its core, is about overcoming this. So Jenna's story is told through the lens of someone who has given up on themselves, who has literally said, I'm not strong enough, I didn't prepare, and whatever, but also showing not me as an athlete, a professional athlete for many years, but my wife, a non-athlete, the process of her emotional both ups and downs. It eventually ends on a high, but there's a lot of low moments in there. And I know you talk about that adversity, both in the mind, body, and soul of how we can use those challenges and setbacks to actually get us to that eventual goal. So I'll stop going on and on. I could talk all day about that, but it was an incredible moment to experience and not a linear path, right? Not we set this goal, trained for it, got to the top, it was great. No. It had a million setbacks along the way. So many times where that didn't look like it was possible, but through creativity and perseverance, she got to the top, and I couldn't be more proud to share that moment with her.
So inspiring, man. You know, as Like I said, she was somebody that really helped inspire and encourage you along a lot of the things that you've done. And then for you to kind of bring it back full circle and help push her to climb something that really helped change your life in a big way, I think had to be so meaningful, not just for you both physically, but also for your marriage. And speaking of your marriage, like obviously you strike me as the person that loves like extremes, like loves pushing yourself to the limit, loves challenging yourself, loves like doing what you can to grow. But that doesn't always work like in a marriage. So how have you learned to like hone your personality or like balance it a little bit to make that relationship dynamic work?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, to me, I value relationships. There's a chapter in the book that's around friendships and community. But at the core of any your relationships, for a lot of people, is kind of their primary partner. Their romantic partner, their spouse. It doesn't have to be, but it's certainly common in adulthood to have that be the case, and that's certainly the case for me. And what I've realized is that if I don't have that in alignment, none of the rest matters, if that makes sense. Like it's sort of like the feats or the successes or the wins or whatever. Without that in alignment, it doesn't matter. There was a interesting moment in my life. I wrote about a little bit about this in my first book that came out a couple years ago, The Impossible First. Jen and I have been together for 15 years now. About 5 years into our relationship, we're going through a rocky moment. I had some goals about racing triathlon professionally. I wanted to make the Olympics, and I was hell-bent on that. It was a childhood dream. I had this opportunity to race triathlon, and I really wanted to focus on that. And what I thought to myself is, I'm so focused on this that I'm willing to sacrifice everything in my life, including my relationships, including my friendships, including, being with this incredible woman that I love very much, because that's what the goal required. And so I broke up with Jenna and I moved to Australia to train triathlon full time. Now I was invited to train as part of this kind of elite triathlon group. I was kind of the young up and comer at the time. And there were several people, men and women in this group, 15 kind of hand selected people. And several of them were, reigning or former world champions, Olympians, the best of the best. And I ended up spending a bunch of time with this woman who was a multiple time world champion. I remember asking her one day, and I thought, here I am. I'm with the best and the best. I'm training with the best and the best. I'm on the other side of the world. This is my ticket to being an Olympian. And I asked her one day, I said, hey, look, like I said, I left my wife behind. We weren't married at the time, but my now wife, my very serious girlfriend, we living together, and I uprooted that, moved to Australia without her, and here I am. So I asked this woman, I said, so what was your favorite win, or what was your favorite race you've ever done? And like I said, she had several world championships to her name, so I was expecting her to be like, oh, it was the time I won the Ironman World Championship, or it was the time I won this race or that race. And she looked at me and she had a quick answer. It didn't take her long to answer. She goes, oh, that's an easy one. It was the time I came second place at the Manchester Commonwealth Games in 2004. And I was like, what are you talking about? You've won all these world championships. How could your best race be a second place? And she said, well, look, my family didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. And so they couldn't travel. All their money went to me, just getting me to a race. There was no chance they could come to a world championship, travel to the other side of the world or whatever. They sacrificed so much for me. She goes, but they live close to Manchester. And so the Commonwealth Games happened to be there. And it was one of my fewest big races of my entire career where my family was there to see me. And she goes, I'll tell you what the most lonely experience on the planet is. Standing on top of a world championship podium, thousands and thousands of miles away from any person that you love or care about. And it just hit me in that moment that I thought I had to sacrifice everything in my life, including my relationship, to go pursue this Olympic goal that I was passionate about in my 20s. And I had cast aside the most important thing in the entirety of my life to pursue that. Meaning, even if I had reached that goal, even if I had that gold medal hanging around my neck, if I was standing there alone, it didn't matter. And so I can't say I hopped on the first plane, but pretty close. I hopped on next planes back to the United States and begged and clogged Jenna to take me back with this newfound wisdom. And I've never lost sight of that, which is to say, I'm proud of my accomplishments. I'm proud of my 10 world records and New York Times bestselling books and different successes externally that I have. But I'm mostly proud of that because I've been able to experience it in the depth of relationship and love and intimacy with my wife, my close friends, my family, etc. And if I had sacrificed those things for these external accolades, they would all mean nothing to me. And I was so grateful for that lesson that I learned at that phase of my life because I fundamentally still believe that is so true.
It's amazing and super inspiring, man. And congrats to you for kind of seeing like the light in that. And because a lot of people, they would have heard that story and they would have been like, oh, like whatever, she's wrong, she doesn't know what she's talking about, I'm just going to keep competing and competing and competing. And then they end up finding out that hard lesson like a lot later in life. And it's just amazing that you found that early on in your career of doing this stuff, and you're now able to create what you've created with Jenna. I mean, a lot of this almost couldn't have happened. I want to go back to like arguably one of the toughest moments of your life, where you nearly died when you were in Thailand. And you mentioned that you had this dream of going to the Olympics and competing as a triathlete, and that all like was shattered in Thailand. So, or it almost got shattered in Thailand. So walk the audience back to like what was going on in your life then, what happened, and like how you were feeling when that event took place.
Yeah. So, I always dreamed of traveling the world at some point in my life. When I was a kid, I didn't have a lot of money growing up. It was more just a dream. But I started painting houses in summer when I was 16, and I then did that all the way through college. And every summer, mostly I was, saving up money to pay for books in school, at college, or whatever. But I ultimately socked away a couple $1,000 every year and said, when I graduate, before I get my quote unquote real job, I'm going to go see the world a little bit. And, I'd saved up not that much money, a few $1,000, but enough to one-way plane ticket. And on the cheap as I could, can I hitchhike? Can I stay in youth hostels? Can I sleep on people's floors and couches? Can I eat how many peanut butter and jelly sandwiches can I eat? That kind of shoestring budget. I had a backpack and a surfboard. And it was an incredible experience for me in my early 20s, just out of college, to have this experience. In fact, it's actually where I met my wife, Jenna, in 2007. I met her on the first stop of my journey in Fiji. We crossed paths for 24 hours and fell in love. So it's a win right out of the gate, no doubt. But I found myself several months later on this beach in rural Thailand, and having what I thought was a time of my life, 22 years old, not a fully formed prefrontal cortex. So I saw some guys jump in a flaming jump rope, and I said, hey, that looks like fun, and didn't really evaluate the consequences. But in an instant, my life changed. I tripped myself over this rope. It was soaked in kerosene that splattered my body, lit my body completely on fire to my neck. And survival mode kicked in when I needed it most, and I jumped into the ocean to extinguish the flames, but not before about 25% of my body was severely burned. And I was in Thailand, but I was not just in anywhere in Thailand. I was actually in a super remote part of Thailand on a small island. They had no proper hospital. I had a moped ride down a dirt path instead of an ambulance ride. And, I underwent 8 surgeries in a series of kind of makeshift hospitals where there was, literally paint the picture for you. There's a cat running around my bed and across my chest in this small ICU. I mean, I was far from home. Talk about adversity, right? And the physical trauma was immense, obviously. But the most traumatic moment of the entire thing was when a doctor walked in about the 4th or 5th day, and he was just being honest, and nothing against him. He just looked me straight in the eye and he says, Colin, I hate to tell you this, but I'm looking at your injuries and it's likely that you'll never walk again normally. And I think that'd be a tough diagnosis for any person of any age. But for me, as a young person whose identity was so tied up in physicality and being in my body, being an athlete, I've been a collegiate swimmer up to this point, I was just shattered. And thankfully, there is a heroine to this story, which is my incredible mother. I can only imagine what it's like to be a parent and be in the hallways of a hospital, watching your son writhe in pain. She told me now she was crying and pleading with the doctors for all sorts of good news, but she never actually showed me that fear, crazy enough. She actually instead came into my hospital room every single day with this huge smile on her face and this air of positivity, talking to me about like, this is bad, Colin, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but what are you going to do when you get out of here? Let's set a goal. What do you want to work on? And I was like, what are you talking about, Mom? What? She's like, no. Visualize yourself without limits. I call it this now in my new book, The 12-Hour Walk, is really framed actually around this concept, a concept that I think we all can conjure in our minds, but it's what I call a possible mindset. A possible mindset, an empowered way of thinking that unlocks a life with limitless possibilities. My mother was saying, this is bad, but there are still limitless possibilities in your future. So do me a favor, close your eyes and visualize something. Tell me whatever pops into your head first thing. So I play along with her seemingly silly game. I close my eyes, I open them back up, and she sees me kind of smile for a second. She goes, what'd you see? And I said, well, I saw myself crossing the finish line of a triathlon. Now, I had never raced a triathlon at this point in my life at all. And so she could have easily looked at me and said, yeah, I said set a goal, visualize something, but maybe something a little more realistic. I mean, look at your legs. Like, hey, you're not going to race a triathlon, right? But instead she said, great, that's your goal. In fact, you should start training for it right now. And she calls for the doctor and asks the doctor to bring in a couple of 10-pound dumbbells and says, hey, my son's training for a triathlon right now. I'm bandaged from the waist down. I can't walk. I haven't gotten out of my bed in a month or something like that. And now I'm lifting dumbbells. My mom's saying he's training for a triathlon, telling every nurse and doctor who walks in the room, my son's training for a triathlon. It seems ridiculous. It seems absolutely ridiculous. But now that's what I said. That's instilling. And it's really at the core of, I know, what you love to talk about, which is I was facing, at that point, the most adversity I'd ever faced in my entire life by far. And my mom was showing me in the midst of this adversity how I could turn this to advantage, how I could turn this into a strength. And so for the next several months, I focused on this goal. I was eventually flown back home to Portland, Oregon, where I grew up, to my mom's house. I hadn't taken a single step. I was carried on and off the plane. I was placed in a wheelchair when I got home. My mother, step by step, kind of taught me how to walk by putting a wooden chair in front of my wheelchair saying, hey, take 1 step. Hey, take 2 steps. Hey, take 3 steps. It was a long road to recovery, but eventually 18 months after being burned in this fire, 18 months after being told I would never walk again normally, but be obsessively focusing on this goal, I found myself at the start line of the Chicago Triathlon, my first ever triathlon. I did the race. I swam a mile. I rode 25 miles on my bike. It was Olympic distance. Then I ran 6.2 miles, crossing the finish line of the Chicago Triathlon just 18 months after being told I would never walk again normally. And the kind of kicker of the story is I actually hadn't just finished the triathlon, but I actually won, placing first out of nearly 5,000 participants on the day. But the interesting piece of this is people have asked me, you could go back in time, would you jump the flaming jump rope, right? If you could tell your younger self, don't jump the freaking jump rope, right? It's a weird question because I would not wish the pain and suffering and the trauma that I put my family through on my worst enemy. I really wouldn't, of course. I mean, it's just horrible. But if I'm being honest, where I'm sitting right now, 15 years later, 10 world records later, the strength that I gained, the lessons that my mom taught me, the book that I have wrote that is not about my own feats, but is literally about a call to action that every single person listening this can cultivate that possible mindset through a 1-day prescription. Again, we'll talk about what that is. But at its core, I learned, and that's why I love that you have this podcast, man, it's awesome, is that through my biggest adversity, I also gained my biggest strength. My mother taught me one of life's most important lessons, and I have taken that lesson, and the ripple effect of that has got me to be having this conversation with you about it. So again, I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but at the same time, God, I'm deeply grateful that I learned that lesson and have been able to be stronger as a result of that adversity, no doubt.
Man, what a story. We've just begun to kind of unpack certain parts of it, and thankfully, your mom kind of came in and didn't let you just pout for months or even years in that moment, because there's a lot of people, and at times, like rightfully so, like I can have empathy and certainly obviously understand, like where somebody has like a life-threatening experience and they're like potentially told they're never going to walk again, they're in a wheelchair, that they would like feel sorry for themselves and say, you know what, like what's the point of trying again because of what happened. Like I can definitely have some empathy for that, but I think at the end of the day, kind of like you said, like you do have some level of choice, and like, all right, like this is the crappy situation I'm in, it's horrible, I can't change it, but what am I going to do moving forward? What can I do to better myself in these moments? You talked about some of the physical stuff that you did. They brought in the set of 10-pound dumbbells. You set a goal to do the triathlon. You started running again. You started doing those things. But I got to imagine, like mentally and emotionally, there was a lot of work that I'm sure had to be done between like the ears and mastering that mental and emotional mindset again. Like, what did that recovery process look like during those initial few years?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's easy to point to the physical things, but all of those physical things are really just a manifestation of the mind, right? You don't take those first steps. You don't get out of the wheelchair. You don't race the triathlon. What I love to say is the most important muscle any of us have is the 6 inches between our ears, right? And I use that, I say that very deliberately, and I say the word muscle, the most important muscle that we have, because we don't often think of our brains or our minds in that context. We think to ourselves, well, if I want to get jacked, upper body or have cool, good biceps for the beach, I better go to lift a bench press. I better go hit the gym, right? Or if I'm going to run a marathon, I better run a bunch of miles before that. We understand that intuitively that our body works that way. Interestingly enough, I think too often we actually don't think about it the other way, which is to say, oh, wait, that's how our mind works too. Meaning, you want to strengthen your mind, you got to take your mind to the mental gym. You got to take your mind to the mental bench press. The 12-hour walk which I want to talk about, this book that I just wrote that I'm so excited to share with the world, is really at its core an exercise of the mind. It's the book itself, it's called 12-Hour Walk, Invest One Day, Conquer Your Mind, and Unlock Your Best Life. To me, unlocking your best life, no matter where you are, you can't change the past, but no matter where you are right now, your mental strength, your mental capacity, your outlook on life is going to dictate how close you are to living your best life or not. Now, the book itself, each chapter, through the lens of Everest and walking across Antarctica solo and rowing a boat across Drake Passage and all sorts of things, as well as just normal stuff from my life, going through the ups and downs of fear of failure and criticism, breaks down a bunch of common limiting beliefs we all have, right? Myself included. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough time. What if I fail? What if people criticize me? I hate being uncomfortable, right? Each chapter breaks down one of these common limiting beliefs, something that, we're holding us back. But what I realize is you can live with these limiting beliefs, or you can shift to a possible mindset. And a possible mindset rewrites all of those different limiting beliefs and says, actually, instead of I hate being uncomfortable, it's I love stepping out of my comfort zone because this is an opportunity to grow. Literally what your whole podcast is about, right? Or I'm broken, I'll never be the same. My body's never the same. It's like, no, right now I've been knocked down, but I can stand back up. I can get stronger, right? Or what if I fail? And it rewrites that fear of failure to failure is the pathway towards success. And I love to say winners lose the most. Winners lose the most because the people that the road to success is paved by failure, perseverance, and eventually success. It's not the people who never failed or never tried at anything. Because if you try something, you're going to fail some of the time. But that's part of the process. So the book really features on that. But again, at its core, and why I'm so excited to share this concept, I can talk more about kind of how I came up with the origin and all that. But at its core, the book is a call to action. It's more than a book, it's a global movement. And what I'm inviting people to do is take their own 12-hour walk. Literally, it's as simple as can be. It costs nothing. It's accessible to every single person, no matter where you're at. To take one day, put it on your calendar, walk out your front door, and go for a 12-hour walk. Now, that might be, you might think, oh, that's ridiculous. I'm not fit enough to walk that. I don't care if you walk for 1 mile or if you walk for 50 miles. I don't care if you take 100 breaks along the way. The one thing that I'm asking you to do is to maintain your solitude and silence. So this is a solo walk. This is a walk without podcasts, without music. I invite you to put your phone on airplane mode and to take a day to reset our minds. Why? I talk about the mental bench press. This is the ultimate mental bench press. This is the ultimate look inside of your own mind. And yes, might there be a time when your feet get tired out there and you feel like giving up? Maybe. But if you push through that, you're going to gain so much strength. There might be a time where certain different limiting beliefs come up in your mind over the course of this walk, but by taking that look inward, by actually pushing through the discomfort, being alone in silence is not something most people ever do for a day. What you will come out with on the other side of 12 hours, that might sound like a long amount of time, but it's actually just one day. It's even just a half a day. I have had so many people test this concept as I've written this book. Every single person comes out stronger, better, more equipped to handle their life, more passionate, more excited, as a better spouse, a better partner, a business, better parent, etc. We so often in this modern world do not take the time away from social media, away from our phone, away from external to just look inside of our minds for a day. And so there's so much power to be gained. And again, like I said, this is meant to meet you exactly where you're at. It's not, oh, hey, you got to train for this for a year and work up the stamina. If you feel like you're not in great shape, like I said, my 77-year-old mother-in-law has taken the 12-hour walk. And what it looked like for her is she walked out her front door in silence and stillness. She walked 1 lap around her block, and then she sat on her front porch for an hour in silence and stillness by herself. And then she walked another lap around her block and then took an hour-long break. She still tapped into the power and she flexed the most important muscle in that exercise, her mind. And so again, obviously you can hear the passion in my voice. I'm excited about this because it's an accessible 1-day prescription that anyone can take that in just a day can have such a sweeping, full, meaningful impact on your mindset as you move forward and unlock your best life.
I love this concept. I was like thinking to myself, like when I could fit this in, it's like, all right, if I start walking at 6, I could be home by 6, I'm just kind of like mapping it out in my head. And I love how you brought up how you can scale this because like, sure, there's going to be people that are listening to this that maybe haven't gone outside for a walk in like 5 years and like 12 hours. They're like, yeah, right. So I'm glad that you kind of could say like, yeah, you could go out, maybe walk for 30 minutes, come back, sit for 30 minutes, go out, walk for 20 minutes, come back, and just like really take that time to gain some clarity and sit in solitude while you kind of reset your mind. I think this is a good time to kind of talk about your exploration of Antarctica and the origin story behind the 12-hour walk, which they go together, right? So I was asking people this morning, I was like, telling people about you, and everyone was like, why? Like, why would he do that? Like, they're just curious as to like why like somebody would want to do that, because I'm sure we all know pushing ourselves physically that can be done in many ways. You can run a 5K, you can run a marathon, you can do a powerlifting competition, you can do all these things to really push the limits physically. But walking across Antarctica is insane to me. So like, what was like why? Like, what was the inspiration behind doing something like that versus just continuing to push yourself in like the endurance sport world?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd been racing, after this Chicago triathlon win, I abandoned my secure future based on what my education, economics degree. I was working in finance, and I quickly quit that job to become a professional triathlete, which again was not like the MLB or Major League Baseball or Major League NBA or something like that. It was definitely more peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and living on my friends' couches. But it did give me the opportunity to push my body. Super passionate about trying to make the Olympics. Fell just a little short of that goal. But I still really wanted to keep pushing myself. And actually, around the time that Jenna, my wife, and I got engaged, we were standing on a mountaintop and really kind of conjuring, again, that possible mindset of going, we're getting engaged, we're going to be together, making this commitment to one another. What do we want our lives to look like? So we sat on this mountaintop and we let ourselves dream beyond, without limits. And I said, well, one question I'm fond of asking people of all different ages, young people, etc., is what's your Everest? Because for me in that moment, I said my childhood dream has always been to climb Mount Everest. And, Everest is expensive and, far out of reach for me at the time, as far as most people and et cetera. But we said, whatever, let's forget about what the limits are for a second. And we dreamed up this thing. What if I could complete something called the Explorer's Grand Slam, to climb the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents and go to both the North and South Pole? And we also said, what if we started a nonprofit that could have impact at scale with young people through the media and exposure of this? And it was this beautiful moment because we're caught up in the moment. We're dreaming big as young people, these dreams, we're going to do this world record. Forget about the fact that it's going to cost $500,000 and we have, a few $1,000 in our bank account. We're going to impact millions of students. Forget the fact that we have no resources. We don't know anything about running a nonprofit. We're just dreaming, right? And then we get back home after our trip where we got engaged, and we get back to our 1-bedroom apartment in Portland. And this is where most dreams die. We know this feeling, right? Where like you wake up the next morning, you're like, it was fun to talk shit about this idea that we had, but like, you're drinking beers with your buddy. We're gonna run that marathon next year, and you wake up on Monday and you call your buddy and you're like, yeah, I think I had a few too many beers. I'm not training for that marathon. I'm out of shape. Whatever. Or we talked about starting that business, but yeah, like, ground that back in reality. Jenna and I woke up and said, we have no money, we have no resources, we have no background, we have no business pulling this thing off. And I won't tell the full story here, but the big limiting belief of we don't have enough money. When I surveyed my Instagram audience and I said, what is stopping you from living your best life? Because I wanted to write a book about unlocking your best life. What is the biggest thing stopping you? 75% of people answered with the exact same thing. I don't have enough money. And so we didn't either. But we believed somehow, and look, it's a longer story than we have time for here, but I had 1,000 doors slammed in my face telling me my idea was ridiculous. I worked at it for 18 months. Jen and I plodded away while also working other things to, keep a roof over our head, but we dreamed in abundance and in passion. And we invested the few $1,000s we had in a website so we could go pitch sponsors and talk to people while people said, no, 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 no. But we had this ability, this mindset around abundance, which is we believe that you can either think of the world in scarcity. I don't have this, therefore I never will. Or I don't have this right now, but is there abundance in this world? So anyways, that unlocked the key for us. But shifting back to Antarctica, I completed the expedition, the Explorer's Grand Slam. I set my first 2 world records. I was incredibly proud of that. I was mostly the most proud of the fact that we did start that nonprofit, and we've ultimately had over 1 million students enrolled in our programs over time that we've been able to inspire in various capacities through curriculum. But Antarctica, like I said, I asked this question, what's your Everest? And I had climbed Everest. And then I went around and asked students, what's your Everest? I've heard so many great answers from students. My Mount Everest to be the first person in my family to graduate from college, or, all sorts of things like that. Then I started asking adults that question. I do a lot of public speaking in, corporate settings, etc. And I asked that question. And what I realized is I'd ask students in a gymnasium full of 500 kids, and 500 hands would shoot up in the air. 8, 9, 10-year-olds telling me what their dream is, telling me what their Everest is. Then I ask a room, 500 adults this question in a corporate context, and I'd be lucky if like one guy at the back of the room raised his hand. And I'm like, what's going on here? And what I realize is that we are all born with a possible mindset. It's actually an innate part of being a human, to dream without limits, to actually believe that we can get to wherever we want to go. But as life goes on, as we get older, the possible mindset is actually stripped away from us. And so this book, The 12-Hour Walk, the exercise of actually taking the 12-hour walk, is not teaching you something you don't know. It's actually reminding you of something you already once believed in and already knew in your being when you came on into this planet. But I had to ask myself this question. I had literally just climbed Everest at this point in my life. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Kick my feet up and do nothing for the rest of my life? I'm in my early 30s. What's my next Everest? And so my curiosity was piqued by not just a world record, but doing something that nobody in history had ever done, which was a solo, unsupported, which means no resupplies of food or fuel. I had to drag a 375-pound sled behind me with all my gear. Unsupported solo crossing of Antarctica. So no dogs, no kites, nothing, just a mano-a-mano 932-mile slog across the totality of the continent from one edge to the other edge. So why? Sorry, long answer to your question, but why? Why? Well, that's what lights me up. That's my Everest. But I asked that question at the beginning of this book because I would say I just happen to like to go to the ends of the earth and mountaintops. That's what lights me up. That's what for me, what feels like me living my best life, fulfilling my deepest curiosity about what we are capable of. Perhaps from the adversity of the burn accident, I thought to myself, well, if I push myself through the adversity of Antarctica walking alone, whether I'm successful or not, I'm sure going to learn something about myself. And I sure did. In the end of that expedition, I wrote a whole chapter in my last book that's called Infinite Love. It wasn't, hey, I finished Antarctica, no one in history had done this, I'm so awesome. It was about connection and relationships and fulfillment and deep passion. And so the 12 hours comes from me walking alone in silence for 12 hours every single day in Antarctica. That's actually what the 12 hours is. However, I get back, I have this infinite love feeling, this high of completing this expedition. All sorts of press and media and opportunities arise after the success of this expedition, which I'm really humbled and proud by. I have a great year coming out of it. And just like we talked about before, COVID hits. The expedition with my wife is canceled. My book tour is canceled in 2020. All the things that I have planned are, we all remember what the spring of 2020 looked like. Just everything we thought we knew the world was like was gone. It didn't exist, taken away, right? And there's all this deep sadness and fear that's justified. People are dying. People are getting sick. I'm locked up in my, house in the Oregon coast, a small cabin my family has. We're locked up in this house. And I thought that I had found the answer walking across Antarctica to being fulfilled, being at peace inside my body and mind, struggling through this difficult thing and ultimately realizing this high. I found myself in a dark place. I found myself depressed. I found myself feeling stuck. I found myself, with the walls, feel like they were crashing in on me, locked up in this house during the COVID lockdown, right? There's several days that would go by. I would never even change out of my pajamas because what was the point? And trying to get myself out of this funk, I thought back, when was the last time I felt good in my body and mind? And I go, it sounded weird, but as starving as I was, as tired as I was, as beat up as my body was, the actual last time that I felt a deep peace was when I was walking 12 hours per day across Antarctica. And so I say to my wife, I say to Jenna, this might sound ridiculous, but don't worry about me. Tomorrow I'm going to wake up early. I'm going to walk out the front door and I'm going to try to, just do a long walk, a 12-hour walk like I used to in Antarctica, but here in Oregon, out my front door. So I step out my front door and 20 minutes goes by and I remember this so vividly. My phone, it buzzes in my pocket, right? Somebody had texted me or something like that and I instinctively reach for it. And right before I start checking my phone and then ultimately get pulled into, my phone, the life of being inside the phone, the social media, the email, the whatever, I stop myself and I go, haven't I had enough of this lately? COVID, I'm doom scrolling the news every single day. I'm checking my social media. I'm Zooming with people, because I can't see anyone in person. I'm staring at these screens. And so I put my phone in airplane mode. Maybe I don't need my phone today. And I end up staying out there. No music, no podcasts, no external inputs. No one's out there because it's COVID lockdown. I'm walking around by myself and I get back to my front door and I walk inside and before I even say a word, Jenna looks at me in the eyes and she goes, something's changed. You look different. Your posture, I can already, before you even open your mouth, she could tell that there had been such a positive shift and she was fundamentally right. I said, I feel better than I have felt in so long. And then I thought to myself, is this 12-hour walk thing just something I can tap back into because I walked across Antarctica for 54 days and I can kind of tap back into this? Or is it the opposite, which is you don't have to go to Antarctica. You actually can do this outside your front door. So I called some friends who are also having a hard time during COVID, and I said, hey, I want you to try this thing. It might sound ridiculous, but would you mind testing this thing out for me? Go for a walk, turn your phone off in airplane mode, right out your front door. They asked me a million, do I got to train for this? No. Tomorrow, do it. People are sitting around with nothing to do. So plenty of people test subjects, willing test subjects. And it has been incredible. Every single person's in a different place. Like, it's not like we're all different, right? We're all confronting different things in our own minds. We're confronting different limiting beliefs. We're struggling through different things in any given moment of life. We're no longer dealing with the COVID lockdown, but at any given time, no matter who you are, the richest, the poorest, the young, old, we're always, in our minds kind of trapped a little bit, right? And people have said to me, they come back from the 12-hour walk. I ask people to take a video of themselves when they start and a video when they end so they can remember it. And people are crying. People are having breakthroughs about things they've been struggling with in their life for years that they ultimately have clarity on. They have ripple effects of energetic positivity and relief. And it's amazing the amount of different people from different walks of life that have taken this walk. And so I said, I want to share this with the world. I want to share this. This is completely free. It costs you nothing. I'd love for you to sign up on my website just so I can send you a couple words of inspiration and get you going. There's lots of FAQs on there, 12hourwalk.com. And I did write a book about it. If you want to pick up the book, that's a great supplement to the walk. But at its core, what I'm trying to share is something that is so simple that any single person anywhere on this planet has access to take a day of your time, walk outside, and spend a day in silence and solitude. I will say one more thing to clarify, because it's a common, frequently asked question, which is, well, I don't live in a rural place and I don't have a beautiful mountain trail to wander down. This walk can be taken anywhere. If you live in Manhattan, you can take this walk. Yeah, don't talk to the millions of people that are going to walk past you on the street, right? But the ambient street noise or other people being around doesn't stop you from being alone in your thoughts. So as long as you don't have a podcast on, as long as you aren't engaging and you're going deep into your mind, you can do this walk anywhere. And I encourage people to actually do it out their front door, not wait for a vacation to be in this other place, because that's even an escapism of some sort, because it will imprint on your daily life in such a deep way from your front door. So it's a call to action, really, that I'm really inspired to, because I believe this world will just be a better place if we can all take a moment, just a moment, a day. I'm on social media still. I'm talking to you here on podcasts. I use my computer every single day. I'm a normal person functioning society. I'm not vilifying technology, but I'm saying we could all use a moment to reset our minds, reset our brains, take a day. And I have seen the life-changing benefits of this one-day prescription and watched it unlock so many people's paths to their best lives.
What a concept, man. And you're definitely seeing walking become so much more popular these days. And I think it's because what you said, like, people are typically, when they're walking, a lot of times it's in silence. They're kind of just shutting off the noise of technology and trying to do some self-discovery, getting intentional about what they're doing, and coming back feeling better. And like, let alone like what you're talking about, like really taking an extended walk, take it to the next level, and just really do like a deep dive on for one day on like some stuff you need to work on, get some clarity, like rebalance yourself mentally and emotionally. You've talked about limiting beliefs, and you talked about the limiting belief specifically with money that you and Jenna kind of had to overcome early on. And I would imagine that people, they're like, all right, Colin's limiting beliefs, like maybe like fear, uncertainty, things like that. Like when climbing Everest, they're a bit different because it's more like life or death. So you're like almost forced from a survival standpoint just to keep going. But we all know that you've experienced like those same limiting beliefs in your everyday life. So what have been some of the similar limiting beliefs that you experienced when doing some of these insane feats that you've done in everyday life? And then how do you overcome them?
Totally. And to be clear, there's plenty of stories in the book. There were a review that just came out about the book that said, it was really positive, and it said, adrenaline junkies and adventure seekers alike, as well as the self-development crowd, will all be pleased with this book because there's something in it for everyone. Which is to say, yes, it's chock full of exciting, heart-pounding adventure stories, but it's also grounded in life. This is not, again, this book is really not about me. I'm not the hero of this story. You, the listener, the reader, are the hero of this journey and the hero of this story. And so I keep you entertained by telling you about rowing a boat across Drake Passage, but I also bring you back into all sorts of normal parts of my life where I have experienced all of these limiting beliefs, just like most people have. One story that I share in the book, and I think it's a common one, it's the limiting belief of, What if people criticize me? What will people say if I blank, right? We all know that feeling, right? Of the sort of expectation of others and not taking reactions to that. So after I won that Chicago triathlon, like I said, I'd taken a job in finance. I have a economics degree, and I was kind of, thinking that was my career, right? And so I started this job and I trained for the triathlon. I won the triathlon, and I coincidentally got invited over to a friend's house for a barbecue that night after the triathlon. And my friend's dad, who is a prolific commodities trader, he says to me, "What'd you do today?" And I told him I won the Chicago triathlon. It's this crazy story. He knew about me being burned in the fire. We have this conversation. He says, "Well, why aren't you pursuing that?" I said, "I would love to pursue this more than anything, but I need a job. I don't come from a family with, a lot of financial background and all this kind of stuff. Like, this is my first real job. I got to pay my bills, whatever." And he says, "So you're telling me if you had a little money to train, you would focus on the Olympics?" And I was kind of like, "Well, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, for sure." And he said, "Well, then I'd love to become your first sponsor. It's not going to be lucrative. You're going to make way less money doing this than you would doing this job. But if you're passionate about it, I'll help you cover some of your expenses, some plane tickets, some food, training expenses, etc." It was an incredible life-changing moment. It's incredibly generous. And so I get home and I call my grandmother. And I was living in Chicago. My grandmother was at the triathlon with me. My mom grew up in Chicago, so my grandmother still lived there. She's passed away now. She's a huge influence in my life. And I was so excited. And I call her and I said, "Grandma, I'm going to quit my job tomorrow and become a professional triathlete." And I don't know why I expected this, because I was so caught up in the excitement of like this moment of this, what I thought was so cool. And she was like, "What? No, you're not. What are you talking about? Like, you grew up with very little. You worked your butt off. You got a scholarship to swim at Yale. You had no business getting into there. You got this degree. Like, it's time for you to actually get a real job and what?" And she talks to me for, I share this dialogue between us in the book, basically her being like, "You're an idiot. Do not quit your job. Like, this is a horrible, rash decision." And I call a couple other friends and family member and weigh this decision with them as well. And the general thesis is like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, you've got this great future. Why would you risk that to, sleep on your friends' couches and race triathlon? But there was something intuitively inside of me. And again, I won't share all the stories of the book, but basically, long story short, I did quit my job. And I did follow my heart. And guess what? I did fail to make the Olympics, meaning I quit my job in pursuit of the Olympics and I failed to make the Olympics. And that's what everyone said. You're going to fail to make the Olympics, and then you're not going to have a real job, and then how are you going to support your family and whatever? And there have been some times when I've had that fear recurring. Oh shit, did I mess up? Did I mess up my future? But I was tapping into this idea that if I continue to follow my heart, I continue to follow my passion, if I continue to look for opportunities, and like I said before, winners lose the most. I failed a lot, and that is why I have succeeded ultimately. And so again, whether it's quitting a job to go race triathlon or just asking yourself, what more do I want out of life? It's the same thing, but it's that fear of criticism. It's that limiting belief. Now, a lot of people have asked me, are you afraid of dying? Are you afraid of dying? You do these risky things. Are you afraid of dying? And I thought about that answer a lot, and I've come to realize that I definitely don't want to die. It's the last thing I want to do. And I've lost friends in some tragedies, unfortunately. So I have no interest in that. But I'm more afraid of not living. I'm actually the most afraid of not living, meaning living my full life. And now I've come to think of life on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being lowest moments. Now, the burn accident in Thailand, and an obvious one, or so much of the adversity of your journey and your story and whatever guests you have on this show. There's a lot of 1s in this adversity advantage that you're talking about, right? And the 10s are the high highs, the peak arcs, the falling in love with my wife, the completing the Antarctica expedition against all odds, the high highs of that. And to use Antarctica as an example, as I stood there, the first person in history to complete this crossing, exhausted, tired, out of food basically, but experiencing a 10, I come to realize that I'm not experiencing this 10, this high, in spite of my 1s, but actually because of them. That the 1s and the 10s, they're connected in our experience of life, meaning I was only able to get this high, this deep fulfillment by being willing to experience that discomfort, by willing to experience those 1s. And I think too often in life, and actually we're caged in by these limiting beliefs, the criticism being only one of them, We live a life, most people often are living a life stuck between the 4 and the 6. Stuck in what I call this zone of comfortable complacency. Stuck being like, yeah, I have a job, it's fine, it pays the bills, I'm not passionate about it, but it's okay, and like, yeah, it's a 5, you know? Or I've been in this long relationship with this person and we coexist. It's not like abusive, we don't fight a lot or whatever, but it's fine. 5, 4, 5, 6, you know, whatever. And realizing like we have so many modern conveniences, right? In this day and age in society, we have phones, we can order food to our front door, we can, you know, have all these things at our fingertips, right? The internet, etc. We can distract ourselves in innumerable ways. We can binge Netflix for hours and hours if we want to. It is easy to live a life stuck in this zone of comfortable complacency. And so one thing the 12-hour walk certainly shakes you up to do, but one thing just general of my life philosophy is I think life is a full tapestry of all of the numbers, of allowing the pendulum to swing. And now people say, but if I have 4 and 5 and 6, maybe I can just add to that and get a few more 7s, 8s, 9s, and 10s. It's like, yeah, you can, but you have to be willing to swip the other way. It's a silly metaphor, I suppose, but imagine you're saying, hey, I want to remodel my kitchen. And you got an old kitchen, you live in a house that has been updated in 30 years. Say, I want to remodel my kitchen. Well, you don't just snap your fingers and all of a sudden there's beautiful granite countertop and a nice new appliances and all this kind of stuff. No, you got to rip out the plumbing, you got to redo the floors, and for a few months in there, it's going to suck. You can't use your kitchen, you can't cook food, you can't really live in your house, you're constructing it. But then eventually, it's complete. You eventually get to this beautiful end result. And so this is no different with our lives, with the full tapestry of life. It's to be willing to have some of those momentary or incremental setbacks along the ways, the 1s and the 2s, etc. And what you talk about in this podcast, the 1 of being burned in the fire, ultimately taught me a multitude of lessons that have allowed me to unlock these 10s. And this walk, which is a scary thing to do, you know, the physical side is a part of it, but really it's to ask people to take a day by themselves alone in their brains. That is far outside of most people's comfort zones. And it might be uncomfortable for a little while, but I'll tell you what, when you get back to your front door after 12 hours, I have a strong sense, because I've watched a lot of people do this, you're going to be a lot more close to that peak arc of that 10 and be deeply gratified and fulfilled that you did this and took on that challenge.
Dude, it's like the epitome and the entire idea of this podcast is like using adversity to your advantage, right? Like you just talked about, it's like turning every setback into a comeback the best that you can. And even though like you're at that place where you're at a 1 in your life, it doesn't mean you'll never get back to a 6 or a 7 or an 8 or a 9 or a 10. I think most people, Colin, when they're in those moments of the 1s, the 2s, and the 3s, they end up like accepting that as like the way they're going to be, because they're like, all right, well, I failed like for 3 months straight, or I have been rejected by 15 people in a row, or I've been fired from X, Y, and Z job, you know, over and over again, or whatever the case may be. And they assume that they're just going to be stuck there, and they will, because then they're going to keep telling themselves that that's going to essentially shape their identity, and they're going to see themselves as a like 1, 2, or 3 level person the rest of their life. But if people can just make that shift, change their perspective a little bit, learn to revamp themselves like step by step, kind of like you did, it gives them a chance to get back to that higher number as a human being and experience more joy in their lives. And before we kind of bring our conversation to a close, and you can let people know like where to buy the book, like the website to find out more information about the challenge and stuff like that, I know you talk about like wanting to have a family one day. And my question around that is like, do you see yourself like when you have kids, like, do you see them being involved in the physical feats that you do, or do you see yourself like letting them do their own thing?
I want to touch back on something you said before that, but I'll answer about the family first. I'm really excited about this next chapter of my life. My wife and I are very excited about, you know, welcoming in hopefully a child into our life very soon, and then hopefully multiple children. And I think perhaps that's one of maybe the most exciting adventures that we can bring, or certainly a really epic one. So I imagine there's going to be the peak arcs there, the sleepless nights of the 1s and the worrying about your kid, and certainly some high highs of love and nurturing of those 10s for sure. And will my risk tolerance be different? I don't know. I'll let you know when I get there. Do I think the same thing will apply, which is I'm afraid of not living? I think that will also be still a part of me, which is I've lived somewhat of an unorthodox life, and as a parent, I might be somewhat of an unorthodox parent. Do I know exactly what that's going to look like? I don't. And I don't feel like I need to have those answers, right? I think that just like anything, diving, I didn't know how I would make it across Antarctica when I stepped out there the first day. And if you know much about my story, I actually pretty much almost instantaneously failed on the very first day, let alone the 50-something day. But I figured it out day by day. And I look at fatherhood the same way. Something else you said before, I think it's a good concluding thought about the 12-hour walk, which is you talked about people that have had a big setback, that have kind of found themselves in this 1, 2, or 3 sort of like moment in their life right now, struggling a little bit and thinking that they're going to be permanently there. So the 12-hour walk, the exercise of the 12-hour walk is interesting because, of course, it's the 12 hours. It's the walking out your front door at 6 a.m., like you said, and coming back at 6 p.m. That is the 12-hour walk. But actually, the 12-hour walk challenge, the 12-hour walk exercise starts right now. The second that I suggested this idea in your mind and you're listening to this podcast, you have started, I'm guessing, at least 1% of your mind, your conscious mind or your subconscious mind has started to think, should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? Is this a good idea for me? Or am I not going to do this? Or I don't have enough time. I got a busy life, kids. How could I ever get a full day off? Whatever, right? There is some level of you bargaining with yourself around this idea. Now, there might be some highly motivated people that are like, heck yeah, I love this idea. I'm doing this tomorrow, whatever. And I salute you. Please, welcome to the tribe. I'm excited to have you. But if you're like most of us, you're weighing this idea in your mind, which means that there's some level of limiting beliefs that are occurring for you. And those might be different for every single person. I don't have enough time, or I'm not fit enough to do this, or I'm not strong enough, or what if I fail, or people might just tell me this is a stupid idea and criticize me, whatever that may be. What's interesting about this is the 12-hour walk exercise starts right now. What I mean by that is by being offered this opportunity, I'm holding up a mirror to you right now. I'm literally holding up a mirror to you. And take a look at what limiting beliefs are coming up for you in your mind in response to even being invited to doing this 12-hour walk. Because the odds are, whatever your interior dialogue is around even considering this exercise, whatever limiting beliefs you're telling yourself, the reasons why you would never be able to do this, are most likely the same or similar, if not the exact same limiting beliefs that are popping up throughout your life as all sorts of other opportunities, curiosities, invitations get invited to your life, opportunities to shift your life. And what you realize, if you have those same limiting beliefs around the 12-hour walk, like I said, it's a mirror, it's a window into your own life of what might be holding you back. But what's so cool and powerful about the 12-hour walk is why I call this limiting beliefs. The word belief is used intentionally, which is these are not truths. These are beliefs. Beliefs can be shifted, they can be changed, they can be adapted, right? And those limiting beliefs around the 12-hour walk, if you say, yep, I'm in my car listening to Doug's podcast right now, and I had all those limiting beliefs pop up. But you know what? I'm going to push those aside. I'm going to push more towards a possible mindset. I'm going to put the 12-hour walk on my calendar. I'm going to complete it. You are going to show yourself, consciously and subconsciously, that the next time those limiting beliefs pop up, that you actually have the power to not listen to them. That you have the power to push through them, that you have the power to overcome them. And that voice of limiting belief in your mind will start to get quieter and quieter and quieter and quieter. And before you know it, you'll be fully in the realm of possible mindset. You'll be fully shifting off of, money is abundant and I can have it too. Or I got injured, I'm broken, I'll never be the same. No, I've been knocked down, but I can get stronger. I can build myself back. That's that possible mindset. That's that shift. So the 12-hour walk, right now, the exercise starts in this moment. In conclusion, thanks for the invitation to share where people can learn more about it. 12-hour walk book, buy it wherever you get books. It's out August 2nd. Pre-order it, buy it. I would really appreciate the support. But whether you buy the book or not, take the walk. Take the walk. Like I said, it costs nothing. I'm inviting everyone to take this walk. If you're struggling to put a day on the calendar or kind of have some structure to it, I'm inviting mass participation on September 10th. So you can do this walk any day, whatever works with your schedule, but I will be walking on September 10th. I have a lot of people already committed to walking on September 10th. And what's that mean? You're going to be walking alone out of your house. It's going to be the exact same thing, but you're going to at least know that there's a bunch of other people that are passionate about making shifts in their life, taking that walk at the same time. And I'm going to do some some Q&A, some Zoom meetups, kind of bring that community together virtually so that we're all basically going through the challenge of the 12-hour walk together. So September 10th is that date. All this information can be found on the website, the12hourwalk.com. Again, like I said, it's completely free to join, but there is a place where you can register. Basically allows me to have some contact with you, send you some words of wisdom, some inspiration as you take on this journey and really step into your best life. Like I like to say, your best life awaits. It's just on the other side of committing to and executing on this 12-hour walk. So I will ask, you've been interviewing me, but I'm going to finish by asking you a question, Doug, which is, are you taking the 12-hour walk? How's September 10th look for you, or any other date coming up? What's your plan, brother?
I'm going to find out where you're doing it, and I'm going to try and come do it with you. Are you going to have like a live event, or is it just going to be you like walking with like people on Zoom and stuff?
Yeah, so like I said, the walk is still in silence, it's still alone, it's still in solitude, and the phone's in airplane mode. So there's not going to be a live stream while we're doing that walk, but it'll be, hey, I'm Colin O Brady here in Jackson Hole, 6 a.m. I'm starting my 12-hour walk, and you might be, hey, Doug here, I'm in Baltimore, walking out my front door, doing my 12-hour walk, and 12 hours later, we'll all be able to share in the joy and camaraderie of knowing that we're out there holding each other accountable. So we won't be walking shoulder to shoulder because the solitude and silence is really the key to the walk, but I think there's power in that. So I would love your participation, whether it's September 10th or another day that works for you, but September 10th is going to be an exciting day for a lot of people to participate in this. So go on the website, register, put your name down, pick your date, and commit to it. Like I said, it seems 12 hours seems like a long thing, but a one-day investment in yourself can have a ripple effect of positivity and conquering your mind and unlocking your best life.
What a way to end, man. Yes, I'm definitely going to do it, whether it's September 10th or another day. And for those listening, man, like what a story, what insights Colin shared in this conversation. I will make sure to include the links to what he shared, the 12-hour walk, the link to buy his book in the show notes. And for those listening, if you could also please share a takeaway. Maybe it was something that Colin said about the relationship with his wife and how that works with the way they do business together. Maybe it was something that he said with his inspirational comeback story after bouncing back from Thailand. Maybe it was something that he said about his why, as far as why he decided to walk across Antarctica. Whatever the takeaway was, tag Colin, tag myself, because we'd love to hear your feedback. And we once again thank you for listening to this episode of The Adversity Advantage. I'm your host, Doug Bopst, and we'll see you next time.